are you and where are you from?
So my name is Pieter van der Hoeven. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Clocktimizer. I'm from the Netherlands, Utrecht to be exact, close to Amsterdam, as is everything in the Netherlands. So that's it. That's who I am, where I'm from.
And what does Clocktimizer do?
So Clocktimizer helps law firms understand who's doing what, when, where, and at what cost, so that especially pricing people, legal project management people, people in service delivery, the people that are really in need of data can make data-driven decisions around pricing, setting the scope of a matter, budgeting, and sometimes we see them actually use this kind of information for process improvements within their firms.
So using data for process improvements, how do you come up with an insight that kind of sparked that? What compelled you to, when did you start this and how did you get started with this? What was the that moment?
This is kind of a wonderful question, right? Because it allows me to go back for a little. So I used to work as an M&A attorney at DLA Piper in Amsterdam. I did that for about 6 years, then changed my career into the financial area, did an MBA. But turned back to legal right after the MBA, actually, particularly because there was one insight that I had that I didn't get, from my from law school. So that was a statistical insight, right? It was if you have a certain number, so let's say roughly, and all statisticians will probably kill me for saying this, but let's say that you have like 30. Random numbers that allows you to say something about that. That number 30 was like, hey, so if you have like data for 30 matters, that was my light bulb moment. If you have data for 30 matters, and you can compare that and the matters are relatively similar, right? And you can compare them across those 30 matters. You can actually say something sensible about that data set. That was kind of wow. Okay, if that's possible, let's see how we can make that possible. Because that was when I thought, hey, we have a lot of data within law firms, right? But it's sitting in your financial system. It's sitting in those narratives that, are a pain to enter, but, quite valuable if you can do something with it. And that's where Clocktimizer comes in, right? So we said, let's give it a try. Let's see if we can come up with a technology to leverage the data that sits in that free text field, right? So that the time card narrative, it's called. And what if we would be able to, on the basis of those narratives, break down those 30 matters into categories that you can actually compare? So that was what we came up with. It's called natural language processing. And it allows us to say for a given matter, what kind of documents did people work on? What type of work did they do, right? Did they spend a lot of time on due diligence, or was it a very complex SPA that people were working on, or was it a shareholder agreement? Stuff like that, where all of a sudden we're able to break down matters by those type of classifications. And that, going back to what was that unique insight, knowing the types of data and the sort of data that was available within law firms, having done that work manually, knowing what a pain that was, combined with then, some basic statistical knowledge, because it's super basic. I'm by no means a statistician. But, bringing those two together, I think that was kind of the light bulb moment.
And when was that?
That was, so I could almost to the day exactly, I could tell you this. This is, I think 2021, December 2012.
Okay. And then if you kind of came into this with the goal of 30, even if you look at it today, if you're saying, hey, 30 is kind of meaningful and you can do some interesting data with that, the whole world is not yet using Clocktimizer. They will be one day, but not yet. It's just a matter of time. But if you said how, like a traditional logic set that an attorney would use when they're trying to make decisions in their mind, or what are they piecing together? 2, 5, 10? I'm just curious, like how you think.
I would say it's closer to 10. And interestingly, because I wanted to test this. So I said, let's see, what does it mean if we, have 10 there's a statistical reason for this as well. But what if you have 10 matters or 20 matters or 30 matters, right? What does that make a difference? It actually turns out that we moved from 10 to 20. The overall numbers didn't change that much all of a sudden anymore. So that means that even that set of 10 matters was already meaningful. Reason for that is that these reference matters are quite similar, and the more similar the population is from a statistical perspective, the easier it is to draw certain conclusions from that population. So from that data set, if you have a similar data set and all the characteristics are the same, then well, if number 11 is a similar matter, then it will have the same characteristics. So that we would say, somewhere around 10 matters is what people typically use to come up with a data-driven decision.
Now that being said, you're, quasi 8 years into the company. How many narratives have you looked at?
Oh man, this is, if only I knew, but we're over 100 million.
Wow, over 100 million.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
On that note, have you seen, I mean, does it feel like, I'm assuming it's one of the larger data sets in the industry, and especially looking at it the way that you guys are looking at it to put it through kind of natural language processing to understand what's happening. How is that aligning with like the timing of market? Or people like, in general, one of our themes is people are using data to make better decisions, as that's what we look for in companies. And it seems like, that's a basis behind your theme, but are people willing to accept that? Are people starting to use it? What's the reaction been? Why do you think now is a good time?
So the challenge always is, and it depends, right? But initially the challenge was pretty much that people said, hey, if it's not 100%, if you only get to 80%, well, actually we get to 95% recognition on
Wow.
these kind of matters. But there's always a level of uncertainty. And I think what we've seen is that the market started to accept that, you're never 100% certain, which is really hard for many attorneys, right? To accept the fact that something is not 100% certain. I mean, if it's not 100% certain, you want caveats, you want disclaimers and things like that. But what we've seen, and you've also seen that in the rise of pricing professionals, which do not necessarily have to have a legal background, and service delivery managers, legal project managers, they tend to look at it from a more financial or data-driven background. Some are attorneys, but with a more tech driven background, and they know that getting to 100%, it's not even 80-20, where 20% of your effort gets you 80% of the way. It's like it's beyond that. So they say, well, hey, but the 95%, we had zero. Right? So if you look at it from that vantage point, if you have zero, you can get to 95. That is a game changer. And they've realized that, and in particular, we have been working with some directors of pricing at law firms who always would have to go back to their data set, at the very least, take 24 to 48 hours to analyze that data set before they could come back with a number. And you probably know as well as I do that, many partners have that RFP on their desk until Friday afternoon when it's due at 5 p.m. And they want to, all of a sudden they need to bring in the pricing director to say, hey, what is a sensible number that we can come up with? Which means that, making that function more meaningful, the pricing director being able to be more of a instant sparring partner for partners in the law firm, that is a change that changes the whole job of a pricing director. It makes them, it allows them to step up the game and say, hey, well, let's think about that, and let's bring in the data that we can have like almost real time. We have that data available, so we can say something that we're confident about.
So you're out there making this data accessible, and then you have pricing folks that are there to really interpret that and to kind of help change culture to some extent. Curious if we fast forward out, and that's been two huge leaps in the last call it 5 years. Yep. If we look 5 to 10 years out, what's that world look like? What do you guys look like in that process?
Oh, well, there's I think one thing that I know pretty sure is that we'll still have billable hours 5 to 10 years from now, despite some people saying the opposite.
Even though every headline, oh yeah,
I know it's kind of what it wouldn't make a good headline, but apart from that, I think it will be still there. But we do see that even though it's a billable hour, clients want to be better informed, and I think. And by no means want to say that Clocktimizer is like Uber, but what Uber did for the taxi market is that nowadays, if you go from A to B, you know what it will cost you before you get into the cab. And 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that just didn't exist. You were at the mercy of a cab driver. Today, I think still too many clients are at the mercy of their attorney for what the costs of their projects will be. And I think that is going to change. That already took a gigantic leap after the previous downturn, and I think in the next 5 years, that's what we'll see, is that clients will just not accept being at the mercy of an attorney for their outcome of financially of their legal work. And I think that's CFOs are not going to accept that anymore. It's just not of this day and age that you just can't have a certain level of predictability for your legal costs. And how will that change us? Well, we're here to help facilitate that transition, I would say. And I mean, I'm glad that we're in that position because I know that, and I know that from myself, that sometimes we think, do we already want to hire an attorney because it's so expensive? And you don't get certainty around costs early on, or it has all those caveats, which if the caveats are reasonable is okay. But I think, ultimately it helps drive people towards firms and towards attorneys to say, okay, if we can quickly get a quote from 3 different attorneys, we at least have an idea and we can prevent things from going south because we brought in an attorney earlier in the process. So I think the whole industry as a whole will serve itself by being more transparent and more predictable.
It's a great analogy, that pricing transparency to Uber, but it's also fascinating how the power and the data that comes from that narrative. If you structure that data properly, it helps the law firm run their business. It helps the client make better decisions, and it goes all the way through to accountants and service providers, and that kind of whole stream gets affected by that transparency. As CEO of the company, or just as you, Pieter, what is something unexpected that you learned this year as we kind of wrap up 2020?
Yeah, I need to think a little bit about it. I think one of the things that surprised me is how few people like to wear their white collars like this. Like I've seen so many calls where people that would always be all suited, fully suited up, and they are in their hoodies. Actually, speaking of which, there you go. My hoodie is right here. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But, how can you run a tech company if you don't have a hoodie, right? It's just impossible. So that's one thing that I was surprised how quickly people from like highest end firms that we know in the market, they're sitting at home, they're wearing their t-shirts. It's just been funny, and the conversations have been maybe because of that more personal, more quickly. I've learned from people that how they supported, how they've watched the voting go on. It's because you're in their homes, you learn more about who they are as a person. I personally really like that. So that's one thing that I think was unexpected, especially for 2020.
We call it a silver lining of 2020 with the rest of the bad things that are happening in the world. But what's something you do to get inspired, to get motivated? I know that having been an entrepreneur, I used to say we're this close to spectacular success or spectacular failure, and you never know which one. And it really is a roller coaster ride. I'm curious, some of the things you do to help cope with that, or some of the things that get you inspired.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't know how long I've been saying it's how's the business going? I've just answered very promising. Luckily, we're past that stage now, but no, that's been too long to my taste. But It always is, I think, for any entrepreneur. So what I do, so one of the things that I try not to do too much is scroll through my LinkedIn feed. For some reason, some posts are quite cool, but there's just so many posts that you go, oh yeah, and we're not there yet, and it kind of tends to depress you, because it gives you the feeling that you're not going fast enough, which I wouldn't say that is the case with what we do. On the flip side of that, if you want to be inspired, if you want to push yourself, you should scroll through your LinkedIn feed. And there's one person that I actually follow. Is Jason Lemkins. I think he sold a digital signature company to Adobe.
Sure.
The guy posts smart things on LinkedIn, and every time that I read, it's like, yeah, you're right. You're right. So I follow him and see what smart things I didn't think of that he thinks of, and it's he's a great story. He's actually the organizer of SaaStr, the conference. So he's a great resource.
I guess you can answer this question with that, but the next question was going to be, who's somebody that you respect, you admire, and why, and you can.
Yeah, and I get that question every now and then. Actually, it's and I've been thinking about this answer, not particularly for this conversation, but before this, and I wouldn't say I'm being inspired by an individual. Everyone has their flaws. Everyone has their good things. So, for example, one of the things that I really admire in Elon Musk is how he says, we don't take no for an answer. If someone says it's not possible, they're fired. We find a way to make it possible. I mean, that's exactly already the flip side of it. I mean, he's going into extremes, but I think the admirable part about that is that he just doesn't accept the fact that some things aren't possible. And because of that, look what he's done. Look what he's achieved. I don't know what he does in his free time, if he has any. But that makes it tricky for me to. That's why I wouldn't say he's not an inspiration as a person, but some of the things that he does, I really think are admirable. So that's I try to pick and choose from some of the people that have made it and shown that they have smart. They have a smart way of looking at things.
What's a fun fact about you, about your team that people don't know?
So I've one for each, actually. So one at Clocktimizer, we're with 17 people, but have 8 nationalities on the team. It's not very widely known fact, but I mean, we've said diversity is important to us right from the start of running Clocktimizer. So while we're in the Netherlands, the company is completely English. We all speak English in our day-to-day communication, just to make sure that we could bring in people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, and we're not restricted by someone who speaks Dutch, which would restrict you from quite a bit of people from the world population. So the other thing is a personal thing. Not many people may know that I've actually worked as a radio DJ, a radio host, during my studies while I was doing law school, at least.
Yeah. Well, watching you do this interview, I could have guessed that.
I don't know. I think I should have, hopped on the podcast bandwagon much earlier, but I love doing this, to be honest.
There's still time. On that note, what can the audience do to help you guys achieve your goals? If you could have one request from folks that are watching on YouTube or wherever they're watching or listening from.
So there's one obvious one. You know what I'm going to say. It's obviously you need to buy Clocktimizer, right? There's 28 out of the MLAW 100 are already using Clocktimizer, so you don't want to miss that boat. Other than that, I would say for anyone buying legal services, ask your attorney to get that fee quote up front and keep them to it. And for everyone who's on the other side, for every attorney, offer your client that transparency. It will go a long way.
You mentioned you mentioned Elon Musk and what he's doing with the self-driving pricing. I don't know if you've watched this. He continuously raises the price because he believes it's adding more and more value. And if you already have 28 of the top 100, maybe you should just continuously raise your price to encourage everybody to kind of get in now.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think it would help if everyone would just sign up before January 1st.
All right. Well, we will try to get this published and pushed out. I thank you for taking a few minutes. Really enjoyed this.
All right. Thanks, Zach. It was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Pieter.